Too wide, too full, her body was too big to breed, so her step drank.
The settlement grid of Derak, 17, didn't wake up. It groaned in a movement like a dying. Steam vented from broken pipes. Power cables sparked above rusted sheet metal rooftops. Makeshift market tents, made of tarp, wire, and welded rebar, flapped in the hot wind. Everything here looked temporary, like it was holding itself together out of habit. Nothing was designed to last. That was the rule on Derak, 17. Survive today. Don't plan for tomorrow. In the middle of the trade hub, two people arrived, both out of place for John Rourke, 36, walked with slow, measured steps. Not because he was cautious, but because every movement cost energy, focus. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He wasn't a contractor either. These days, he salvaged scrap out in the ash flats, repaired what could be repaired, and sold the rest. Quiet, routine, the kind of life that made sure he never got close. He kept to himself, didn't drink, didn't smile, didn't speak more than necessary. He had one goal: his fuel cells. 4 of them. His backup generator had coughed its last breath 2 nights ago. Without power, his compound would be vulnerable. No defense grid, no gate controls, no heat. If he didn't get what he needed today, he'd have to leave the perimeter open. That was a risk he didn't want. He moved between stalls, glancing over cables and converter units with a sharp eye. His hands were rough, fingers calloused and stained from years of grease. He ignored the noise around him. That was when he heard a voice, slurred, too loud. "You there, human?" John looked up. Across the lot, standing near a pile of scavenged crates, was a thin Valari male, older, dressed in layered cloth robes, dark. His skin was mottled, a faded plum color. The man swayed slightly on his feet. A synth rope ran from his gloved hand to something or someone behind him. John followed the rope, then he saw her. She was huge. Not tall like a soldier or stretched out. She was massive. 7 feet, easy. Broad, heavy, built like someone whose body had grown without permission and never been allowed to stop. Her violet skin caught the harsh daylight, marred by bruises, ash smudges, and patches of dry flakes along her shoulder. She was wrapped in a makeshift sheet of stained thermal cloth, knotted at her side. Her feet were bare, cracked, and dirty. Her chest strained under a strip of canvas banding. It barely held together. She didn't look at John. She didn't look at anything. The Valari male tugged the rope. "You looking to trade? I'm not picky. Food, fuel, drink, hell, even ammo. Take her." John didn't move. "I don't deal in slaves." "She ain't a slave," the man muttered, shifting his weight. "She's unwanted. Makes no sense to keep her. She's too big to breed. Don't fit the birthing protocol." Got judged unfit by the splicers back on Kareenville. "Waste of genetic potential," they said. John's jaw tensed. "And you are?" "Stepfather. In name, anyway. Her mother was mine." She bled out, trying to push this one out. "Left me with a problem I didn't." He took a swig from a dinner canteen and wiped his mouth with the back. She grew and kept growing. Couldn't work, couldn't get certified. Scared the med scribes said her mass was excessive. Internal structure misaligned. Reproductive tract distorted. Said she'd die or kill a mate if she ever tried to carry. John looked back at the girl. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't moved at all. Valari culture's built around optimal biomatchings, the man continued. "You're born, you get assessed, you get bred. If she failed, that made her trash. I did what I could. Fed her. Let her stay. But now," he glanced around, lowering his, "now she's just meat. And I need drink." John didn't respond. He couldn't. His stomach had clenched the moment the word meat left. Valasha. That was her name. He could see it inked in faded script on the collar, barely visible beneath the dirt. She stood still, arms across her belly, chest slightly hunched, trying to disappear in her own body. But there was no hiding it. She was large. She was soft. And she was standing here like an object being offered. "You trade her for what?" John asked, his voice low. The man smiled. "1 crate of synth fire. That's it. She eats less than you'd think. Can clean. Sleeps a lot. Doesn't speak." John looked at her again. She wasn't just silent. She was bracing for whatever came, like she already knew what men were capable. He hated that. Hated it more than he expected. He turned away, pretending to walk back toward the market. But instead of leaving, he circled to his hauler and unlocked the supply hold. Inside was a sealed crate marked SYNF 18. Standard synthetic strong, crude, used by half the outpost to stay numb. He hoisted the crate onto his shoulder, walked back, and dropped it at the Volari. The man crouched greedily, opening the seal to check the label. "You said she wasn't property," John said sharply. "Cut the damn rope." The man snorted but complied. The synth rope dropped. Valasha didn't react. Her arms stayed crossed. Her feet didn't move. "Valasha," John said, addressing her directly. "You can walk. You don't belong to— Not anymore. I'm not going to hurt you." Her eyes lifted, silver irises with flecks of pale violet. Unreadable, exhausted, distant. About shelter, out past the ridgeline. Safe, off-grid. You come, you eat, you rest. No conditions. She said nothing, but her chest rose and fell with a slow, sharp breath. Then she stepped forward. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't ask why he'd taken her. She just climbed into the hauler's cab and closed the door behind her. The ride out to the scrapyard took 42 minutes. Neither of them spoke. The terrain blurred past the windows, black dunes, rusted towers, animal skeletons picked clean. The wind howled low. Valasha sat rigid, hands folded between her knees. The cab creaked under her weight. Her thigh pressed against the gear column. Her shoulder nearly touched the window. John glanced over once, quietly. Her hair fell across her face in heavy strands. She didn't look up. He pulled into the yard and keyed in the gate. It opened with a groan. Inside the compound, spare engine blocks, solar dishes, repulsor scrap, a rusted Walker chassis. A junkyard fortress built from the bones of lost machines. John parked beside the main hangar and shut off the engine. "You can stay in the east wing. There's a cot. Water unit, still no response." He exited first. She followed slowly, barefoot on the gravel. Her knees buckled slightly as she stepped down. John didn't offer, she didn't ask. Inside the hangar, it smelled like ozone and tools hung in neat rows. A workbench stood lit by a flickering hololamp. John pointed to the door at the back, an old office he'd converted into a live. "You'll be warm in there. There's food in the crate. Don't wait up." As he turned to leave, her voice broke the silence. "Why?" He paused. Her words were dry, raw. "Why would you take me?" John turned, face unreadable. "You looked like you needed someone." She looked away. Not ashamed, just unsure. "My name is Valasha," she said softly. John nodded. "Mine's John." She nodded back, and stepped inside the room, closed the door, and locked it. John didn't sleep much that night. He lay on a stripped mattress in the tool shed, staring at the ceiling fan that didn't turn. He thought about her, about what it meant to be seen as useless, about what it must have felt like to be handed off like scrap. He didn't know why he brought her here. Maybe guilt, maybe anger, maybe both. But he knew one thing already. She wasn't weak. And if she stayed, he'd make damn sure no one ever touched her like. Tomorrow, they'd start figuring out what she could do, what she wanted to do. For now, she was safe. That would be enough. The sun rose slow over Derak, 17, casting pale orange light across the scrapyard walls and stretching long shadows between piles of scorched plating and shattered. The wind was quiet that still, as if even the planet was waiting to see what would happen. John was already awake, hunched over the workbench in the main bay, soldering a broken circuit spine from an old surface scanner. He hadn't spoken since sunrise. The radio sat quiet. No background, just the soft, repetitive click of the iron against wire and the low hum of the solar panels kicking in. He heard the door creak behind him. Valasha stepped into the open hangar slowly. She was wearing his black work shirt, badly buttoned again, hanging off one shoulder, and a pair of cut-off cargo pants that ended above. The shirt tugged tightly around her chest, every movement stretching the fabric. She looked uncomfortable in it, unsure if she was allowed to be seen. John looked up, but didn't stare. "You find the food crate?" he asked. She gave a small nod. "Yes, I didn't eat much." "That's all right." A long pause. Then she asked something he hadn't expected. "Is this place yours?" John nodded once. "Built it up over 6. Was a salvage tech contract jobs. When the siege happened, I pulled out early. Got lucky. Bought the land rights for this grid. Not many wanted to settle this far out." She took a few slow steps inside. The metal floor creaked under her weight. Her fingers brushed a hanging cable, then traced the edge of an old data core line. She wasn't just looking around. She was trying to understand the rules of where she was allowed. What would get her yelled at? "Why did you leave?" she asked softly. "The war zone, I mean." John didn't answer immediately. He tightened a circuit clamp, then set the tool down with care. "Because I lost someone." He didn't elaborate. She didn't push. But the silence after those words felt like acknowledgement. Like something in her chest understood exact. Valasha sat on a nearby crate. It groaned softly under her weight. She pulled her knees together, folding her hands. The shirt rode high on her thighs, but she didn't seem to notice. After a long pause, she spoke again. "You didn't ask what I did. I figured you'd tell me if you wanted to. I was a birthing candidate. From age 12, they made us follow dietary regimens, posture alignment, hormonal monitoring. It was supposed to make us efficient." Her voice was flat, factual. "When I turned 16, the medical cast said my growth patterns had deviated, that I had developed excessive too much mass, too wide for parent cradles, unsafe for gestation, unfit." She looked away. John didn't move. He just listened. "They told my mother she'd failed to regulate my early development, that it was her fault. She didn't survive the next cycle." That answered the question left open in Chapter 1. John felt the answer hit heavier than expected. "What happened after?" "Grail," she said quietly. "He drank more, hit less. Mostly he just ignored me. I took care of the wasteland. Cooked when he wasn't passed out. He never really looked at me until he ran out of things to sell." She paused. Her fingers curled on her knee. "When I woke up chained outside the trader hub, I already knew what." John stayed silent. He didn't give her sympathy. Didn't try to touch her arm or say something vague and comforting. He just nodded once, deeply, and went back to tightening the fuse case. That gesture said more than words could. Valasha watched him work. After a few minutes, she spoke again. "I want to do something. Not just sit. You ever use a plasma driver?" "No." "Then today you'll learn." That was it. No test. No warnings. Just trust. John stood and handed her a compact fusion tool. It was heavy, too small for her hands, really, but she didn't hesitate. He led her to the busted side panel of a drone chassis and began showing her where to cut. She followed his motions carefully. Her fingers were steady. She didn't speak much. Neither did he. But something shifted in the air. For the first time in her adult life, no one was monitoring her intake, weighing her limbs, evaluating her body for future. No one was asking her to justify. She just worked. Around midday, she wiped sweat from her face and unbuttoned the top of the shirt. The collar fell open. A glimpse of her violet cleavage caught the light. John noticed but didn't stare. He turned back to the wiring like nothing. That mattered more than anything else. When night fell, they ate together. Simple ration stew. Valasha sat at the workbench beside him. The silence was no longer. It felt normal, like something beginning to settle. After the dishes were cleared, she didn't go back to the office room right away. Instead, she lingered. "I want to ask something." John looked up. "If I'd been smaller, do you think I'd still be here?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked her in the eye. "No," he said, "because I probably wouldn't have noticed you." She blinked. "So, it's a good thing I'm like." "It's a real thing," John said. "You don't have to make it good or bad. Just yours." For a second, she didn't breathe. Then she gave a single, small nod. Her expression didn't change, but the tension in her shoulders eased just a little. She stood, quietly. "Good night, John." He gave her a tired nod. "Night." As she walked back to her room, her steps were still careful, but less like someone trying to. Outside, a low whine echoed and far off. Faint. John froze, turning toward the northern. He didn't like the sound. It was a surveillance drone, scouting pattern. He rose from the bench and crossed to the exterior sensor A faint red ping blinked on the edge of the compound's rig. Someone was sniffing around. He looked back at the closed door of the office where Valasha was changing. His jaw tightened. They'd come for her, and he'd already made his choice. The next morning, John was already outside before sunrise, kneeling beneath the western fence line. He held a handheld diagnostic scanner in one hand and a rusty panel. The drone pinged from the night before but he wasn't going to take. He needed to reinforce the perimeter, patch every weak spot, double the motion triggers. No one was taking Valasha. Not while she was under his... He didn't hear her approach. "Is it broken?" Valasha asked, her voice still husky from sleep. John turned. She stood barefoot in the dust, wearing the same cargo shorts and one of his faded gray. The shirt clung tight around her chest and belly, the hem riding high on her wide. Her hair was tied back messily with a strip of cable. Her arms were crossed, not to hide this time, but out of habit. "Worn down," John said, gesturing to the cracked panel. "This fence won't stop anyone who really..." She nodded, then crouched beside him, awkwardly, carefully, trying not to split the scene. "You think someone will come?" John exhaled. "I know they will." He didn't sugarcoat it. There was no point. Valasha didn't. She traced her finger along the cracked weld line. "I can help. I'm not fast, but I'm strong. I can move scrap, load cores, drag equipment." John gave her a sideways, "You've never been trained." "I've been ignored." "I paid attention." He nodded once. "Then we'll start with welding. You're too tall for the bench." They worked side by side for hours. She wasn't quick, but she was precise. Her hands were steady. She didn't complain when sparks sprayed or when the torch kicked. John showed her how to layer a seal line, how to angle the torch without overheating. She watched him closely, absorbing every move. By mid-afternoon, she'd reinforced 3 of the fence sections. They paused near the water pump. John handed her a metal flask. She drank in slow sips, careful not to spill. Then, she asked the question that had been hovering since her arrival. "Why did you really take me?" He didn't answer immediately. "You don't owe me anything," she added. "You didn't know me. You weren't looking for anyone." John leaned against the pump housing. The metal was hot under his back. "You look like someone no one else was going to help." That was enough. Valasha nodded slowly. Then, quietly, "I didn't expect you to speak to me like a person." John looked over. "What did you expect?" She hesitated. "Touch. Hunger. Ownership." John's jaw tensed. "Then I'm sorry for whatever came before," he said. "But I'm not him. And I'm not going to ask for anything." "You already gave me something," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "A place." And silence. They stood there for a moment, not speaking. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full. Of weight. Of understanding. That evening, she cooked. It wasn't much. Hydrated grain and protein paste, seasoned with sin. She didn't ask permission. She just did it. The way she moved in the kitchen was methodical, focused. Not graceful, but grounded. She had large hands, broad shoulders, but her fingers stirred gently. Like the act of making food was the only way she remembered how to show. John took his bowl with a simple thanks and sat across. They ate without talking for... Then she spoke again. "My people used to say that everything had to serve a role. Beauty, strength, fertility, intelligence. If you didn't fit one of those, you were waste." John glanced up from his bowl. "And you?" "I didn't fit any of them," she said flatly. "Too big to model. Too clumsy to fight. Too soft to bear children. Too quiet to lead." "Then they're blind," John said without hesitation. She blinked at him. "Anyone who thinks worth comes from a narrow list doesn't... or life." She didn't respond right away, but her throat moved with a slow swallow, and her gaze lowered, not out of shame, more like she didn't know what to do with the way those words. Later, as they cleaned the table, John noticed something odd on the comp. A small red dot flickered near the stationary. Not a drone. Not moving. He turned to Valasha. "You ever see a slaver mark their target with a locator beacon?" She froze. "Yes." "Show me where they'd put it." She followed him outside. They checked the hauler, the storage crates, the fence posts. It was she who found it, tucked beneath one of the axle mounts on the outer hoist track. A small magnetic beacon, no larger than a coin. Light still blinking. John snapped it off and crushed it on. Valasha watched the pieces scatter. "They're close," she said. "Too close." John moved quickly, triggering the perimeter lockdown. Gates sealed. Backup alarms armed. He turned to Valasha. "You know this place now? Lay out, exit. If they come, you don't hide. You fight. I'm not a soldier. You're stronger than..." Valasha's fists clenched. Her body, big, soft, heavy, suddenly felt like an asset, not a burden. Her arms could lift half a hull. Her legs could push back. She'd never been told that her size was power until now. That night, she didn't close the door. John noticed. He didn't enter, but he paused, standing in the hallway. She lay on the cot, under the rough blanket, staring. "Do you want me to keep the lights on out here?" he asked. "No," she said. "I want to hear your steps." He nodded once. "Then I'll keep walking." As he moved back toward the main hangar, he heard her voice, low, trembling, but steady. "I'm not afraid anymore. Not of them. Not of being seen." He didn't turn back, but he smiled, for the first time in years. The next 3 days passed under a thick veil of tension. Slaver patrols hadn't shown up in person yet, but the signs were there, half-scrub boot tracks near the outer ridge, faint static on the emergence, a single piece of metal netting left folded near the southern. Someone was scouting, waiting, measuring risk. John doubled the security. He buried motion sensors around the southern perimeter, modified a field drone into a mobile scanner, and rigged a makeshift tripwire alarm using repurposed shock. Valasha followed him through every step, watching, lifting, learning. By day 4, she was the one welding spare plates to the inner fence bracket. The sweat beading on her violet skin caught the dusty sun like pollen. Her arms moved with power, her stance solid. She didn't speak much while working. John didn't need her to. They had fallen into unspoken coordination. But inside that rhythm, something else stirred. That night, the heat didn't break. Air inside the compound hung heavy and close. John stood under the shower pipe, scrubbing dried grit off. He left the door cracked for airflow. Valasha walked past. She paused, just for a second. He saw her shadow hesitate through the steam. John didn't speak. He just turned a valve, shut the water off, and dried off. When he stepped out, she was still there, half lit by the corridor lamp, wearing only one of his long, her hair loose and damp from a quick. Her bare feet were dusted gray. She didn't move. She didn't explain. "Bad dream?" John asked softly. Valasha shook her head. "No, just needed air." Her voice was low, almost. "You can come inside," John said after a pause. "You don't have to, just if you want to." She stepped into the room. He sat on the edge of the cot. She remained by the door, hands clasped in front of her, her belly pressed against the fabric of the shirt, full and soft. Her silver eyes locked onto him. "I used to hate this body," she said. "The way I took up space. The way I couldn't be. I thought maybe if I stayed quiet enough, still enough, I'd stop it." John didn't respond right away. He didn't try to fix it. "I don't want to disappear anymore," she added, her voice breaking slightly. John rose slowly, walked to her, stopped just close enough that their bodies shared warmth but not contact. "You haven't disappeared," he said. "You're right here." Valasha's hand moved. Not boldly, not sure. But she lifted it and touched the side of his chest, flat fingers against a scar just beneath his collarbone. Her skin was warm, steady. "Can I stay here tonight?" she asked, voice hushed. "Yes," John said. "No expectations." "I know." She lay beside him on the cot, which was barely wide enough. Her thick thigh brushed, her arm draped loosely over his stomach. The light stayed off. No kissing, no breathless tension. Just wait. Warmth. Safety. She fell asleep first, curled against his side, breathing slow. John lay awake for a while longer. It had been years since someone had touched, without fear, without transaction, without the weight of survival pressing down. When he finally closed his eyes, he felt it in his chest. Not guilt, not loss. Something else. Hope. At dawn, the warning sensor tripped. A low, shrill beep echoed through the compound. John shot up, grabbed his vest and rifle. Valasha was already moving. No hesitation. She stood in the doorway, wide-shouldered and "Where?" she asked. "Southern Ridge." They both rushed to the outer bay. John pulled the surveillance feed. A drone, small, insect-shaped, built for recon, hovered just above the dry ridge brush, scanning the compound's walls with thin. "They found you," John muttered. Valasha didn't. "Then they'll come." How long would they wait? Not long. They don't like losing product. John turned to her. "You're not product." Valasha nodded. "Then let's prove it." They had less than 6 hours before the storm came. Not just a weather front, a convoy. And this time, they weren't here to negotiate. They were here to reclaim her. John checked the charge level on the fence capacity. Not enough. He looked at Valasha. Her jaw was set, her stance steady. She didn't shrink. "You ready?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I won't run." He smiled. "That's good enough." And together, they started to prepare for the night that would decide. The storm didn't come with thunder. It came with engines, low and guttural, rumbling over the ridge long. John stood at the edge of the compound, eyes fixed on the southern horizon. Dust clouds curled in the wind. He counted 3 skiffs, light armored haulers painted in dull gray, no insignia, no guild colors, just matte plating and mounted auto. Slavers disguised as freelance traders. "They're not wasting time," he muttered. Beside him, Valasha adjusted the strap of the makeshift harness they'd built from scrap belts and stabilized. It fit snug across her massive chest and thick shoulders, connecting to a reinforced steel pry bar slung. "I've seen these types before," she said. "They don't take chances. If they spot me, they'll shoot to disable." "They won't get the chance," John said, pulling the bolt on his rifle and chambering. She didn't ask what the plan was. They'd already rehearsed it twice since the drone sighting. Power up the north capacitor as bait. Lure them through the trigger the detour, then isolate and neutralize. But no plan survives contact. John knew that. So did she. The hauler stopped just outside scan. 3 figures dismounted. 2 wore filtered visors, exosuits padded. The third, a woman, pale-skinned, lips marked with black sigils, held a control wand in one hand. Socket. John stepped behind the outer barricade. Valasha crouched low, half shadowed by the shell of a rusted cargo. The slavers approached on foot. "No movement yet," John whispered, his eye locked to the scope. "Wait for my mark." The lead woman raised her voice, amplified through a throat-mounted. "John Rourke, we're not here for trouble." John didn't respond. "We tracked a stolen Valari breeding class female to this location. She's guild flagged, violently unstable. We're authorized to retrieve her." Valasha's breath caught. She shifted slightly, fists clenched. "Stay down," John whispered. "Doesn't sound like a request." "It's not. That's why I'm not answering." A second voice piped in from behind the slavers, lower, male. Thermals show movement behind the wall. "Confirm target. Let's just breach." John flipped the switch. The compound's south capacitor lit up, a sudden flare of blue lightning arcing along. It sent a pulse through the metal, forcing the slavers back a step. That was their window. Valasha moved. Fast. Too fast for her size. She emerged from the loader's shadow with a thunderous step, grabbed the pry bar from her back, and charged. The male slaver saw her. He aimed, but not fast enough. She slammed the bar into his chest, knocking him clear off. His rifle clattered against the gravel. He didn't get back up. The second slaver fired. 2 shots grazed her arm and shoulder, but she was already closing in. Her massive body collided with his like a batter. He went down hard. John had the woman in his sights. "Drop the wand," he barked, stepping out from cover. The woman turned, wand raised. John fired. The bullet struck the wand, shattering it in her. She screamed, clutching her fingers, then dropped to her knees as Valasha approached. "No more collars," Valasha said coldly, breathing hard, blood streaking her bicep. The woman spat. "You think you're free now? You're not. You're defective stock." Valasha raised the pry bar, then stopped. "No," she said, stepping back. "You don't get to define me anymore." John lowered his weapon. Sirens echoed, guild drones, probably rerouted by the capacity. They had to move. John grabbed supplies, hauled the bodies outside the fence, and doused the area with synthetic oil to obscure traces. Valasha disabled the haulers with brutal precision, smashing control panels, shredding. Her hands were stained, her arms bruised, but her expression never wavered. When it was done, they stood at the edge of the compound as the twins' son. "Do you think he'll come back?" she asked. "Eventually," John said, "but not soon. Not after this." Valasha turned to him. "You risked everything. So did you." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "I was never allowed to touch anyone. Not without permission. Not unless I'd been assigned." John nodded. "You don't need permission here." She raised her hand slowly, placed it against his chest, flat, warm, steady. "I know," she whispered, "but I still wanted to ask." John placed his hand. "You can stay, as long as you want." "As you." She leaned into him, her body soft, massive, no longer shrinking, no longer apologizing for space. She took up. That night, they didn't speak. They lay close and their bodies pressed together under the thin blanket, skin on skin. Not for lust, for belonging. For the first time in her life, Valasha didn't feel too big. She felt right. The storm had passed, but its weight still hung. Morning light crept across the compound in soft, golden sheets, filtered through clouds of linger. The wind was quiet. No alarms, no patrols, no engines, just stillness. Inside the workshop's converted room, John stirred. Valasha was still wrapped around him, her head tucked against his chest, one arm draped over his stomach, leg hooked over his thigh. Her weight was full and grounding, the heat of her skin still warming the sheets. Her breathing was deep and steady. She hadn't moved all night. For a long while, John didn't either. He stared at the ceiling, feeling her breath against his collarbone, listening to the steady rhythm of her chest rising and falling. Her size wasn't something to adjust to. It was something to be grateful. She filled the space beside him, not just with her body, but with presence, with meaning. He moved one hand slowly, tracing along her back, down the thick line of her spine, past the soft dip. She shifted slightly in her sleep, murmuring something that didn't quite become. He let his palm rest against her hip, anchoring himself. This wasn't just closeness. This was after. No shame, no doubt. Just two people who had chosen. Valasha eventually stirred, lifting her head slowly. Her hair was tangled, her eyes heavy with sleep. She blinked at him. Then, when she saw his face, she relaxed into a soft, quiet smile. "Still here," she whispered. "Not going anywhere," John said, brushing a strand of hair. She looked down at herself, then at him, then at the bed that was still clearly not. "I'm surprised this thing didn't snap," she murmured. He smirked, might have groaned a few times. She shifted to sit up, the blanket sliding down her back. Her body moved with slow grace, every curve and swell cast in soft. She didn't cover herself. She didn't need to. For the first time, her body wasn't something she tried out. She stood and stretched, her full silhouette framed by the glow of the hallway light. John watched her, still stunned, still quiet. "What?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder. He paused, voice catching. "Real." She laughed softly, short, surprised. "You say that like it's a compliment." "It is." John got up, pulled on his shirt, and reached for the utility. The sensors were still clean. No movement outside the perimeter. He exhaled through his nose, letting his mind shift from her skin to. "We should do a full scan run," he said. "Even if they're gone, we need to make sure they didn't." Valasha nodded, already pulling on her cutoff shorts and his second work. This one looser, sleeves rolled. It barely fit her hips, but she adjusted the belt and stepped into her. By the time they reached the outer yard, she was already scanning the skyline. "Your hauler's still operational?" she asked. John looked at her. "You thinking of leaving?" "No," she looked him in the eye. "But I'm thinking we need to prepare, and I don't want to sit here hiding, hoping they don't." John hesitated. "You want to fight?" he said. Valasha shook her head. "I want to live. That means being ready." They worked until late afternoon, patching power nodes, recharging the outer capacitor grid, mounting new light trigger. Valasha handled the heavy work, moving scrap plating, reinforcing gate locks, dragging generators into position. John calibrated the circuitry, guided the installs, rewired the shorted core by hand. By evening, they were back inside. The table was quiet. The stew was hot. Valasha sat with her leg curled, eating slowly, glancing toward the hangar door every so often. John caught it. "You still think they'll come again?" "Eventually," she said. "But I'm not afraid anymore." "You're sure?" She looked at him, serious. "I know who I am now." He didn't respond with. He just reached across the table and took her hand. Her large, warm hand held it. No pressure, no performance, just real contact. Her thumb brushed the edge of his palm. "I never knew what came after survival," she whispered. "Now you do." She stood slowly, walked around the table, and knelt beside his chair. Her arms wrapped around him from the side, her head resting against his shoulder. Her body dwarfed his again, but there was no awkwardness. "I want to stay here," she said. "With you. You already are. And if they come again..." John cut her off. "Then we face it. Together." That night, they slept in the same bed again. No urgency. No battle. No fear. Just touch. Just breath. Just the slow-burning warmth of two people who had chosen each other against everything. And outside, under the dark sky of Derak 17, the slavers' broken haulers sat in the sand, scorched, hollowed, empty. Valasha had once been told her body was too big to bear. Now she was the future, and it had just begun. The rains came 3 weeks later. Not water. Derak 17 didn't have real weather, just chemical drizzle that stripped the paint off old plating and clung to the skin like static. The skies had turned the color of lead, gray on gray, motionless and cold. But inside the compound, under the scavenged roof John and Valasha rebuilt together, it was warm. There was a stove now, 2 beds welded into a storage wall with real supplies, sealed tools, heat packs. Valasha had reinforced the back gate herself, adding a manual override. John, he fixed the solar array and got the lights running on full capacity for the first time. They'd turned survival, and this morning, something shifted again. Valasha stood by the workbench in the hangar, one hand braced against the edge, her other resting low on her belly. Her face was still, quiet, but something in her chest was trembling. John stepped in, wiping his hands on a towel. He froze when he saw her face. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head slowly, then looked at him. Not afraid, not uncertain. "Just changed. I need to tell you something," she said. He waited, heart thudding. "I missed 2 heat cycles." John blinked. Valasha looked down at her hands, then back at him. "I didn't think it was possible. Not with my body, not after what they said. I believed them. I believed I was broken." She stepped toward him, bare feet on the cool floor, his oversized shirt hanging open just enough to reveal the soft, "I don't think I am." John stared at her face, at her body. Then, without a word, he crossed the space between them and wrapped her in his arms, holding her tight, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other pressing flat. Valasha inhaled hard. A sound broke in her chest. Not quite a sob, not quite a... Her whole body trembled and, "I don't know what happens next," she whispered against his collarbone. "I don't know how to do this." "You don't have to," John murmured. "Not alone." They stood like that a long time. Later that day, they sat outside under the metal awning, watching the chemical rain fall. Valasha curled beside him, on her head resting against his shoulder. Her thick legs stretched out in front of her, crossed at one hand stayed on her belly, always, as if already protecting something. "I used to think I had no future," she said quietly. John glanced at her, and now she looked up at him with silver eyes full of quiet. "Now I think I am the future." He didn't respond. He just kissed her, not urgently, not possessively, but slowly, with presence, with care, with the kind of certainty that said, "We made it." The world outside was still hostile. Derak 17 hadn't softened. The sky was the same stained bronze, the soil just as brittle. Trade convoys still passed warily through the outer ridges, and slaver tags were still found half buried in the sand, blinking red until... But inside the compound, behind reinforced walls, under patched roofing and newly installed sun filter, everything... It was late afternoon when the wind calmed. The dust had settled on the eastern ridge, and the outer sensors picked up nothing for the third. Peace, even if temporary, had taken root. Inside the main hangar, the light was gentle, dimmed by old window filters and filtered through high solar panels that now powered every room at full. Valasha moved slowly across the main bay floor, one hand on the curve, the other bracing herself gently. She wasn't in pain, but her body had changed. It had grown, expanded. Her gait had softened, slowed, weighted. Her belly had become full, round and warm, resting forward. The small stretch lines along her violet skin shimmered faintly under the... She wore a modified version of John's largest shirt. The sleeves rolled, the fabric cinched carefully beneath her bust with a reinforced band to take pressure off. Below, her thighs were bare, thick, and steady. Her feet were planted wide with each step, grounded. She didn't hide any. John watched her from the doorway of the office, now a shared living space that felt nothing like the cold, makeshift cot. He didn't speak as she walked past the rows of labeled storage crates, checking systems out of habit. Her instincts had changed. Everything she did now was slower, more deliberate, like she was living. "Power's still holding it full," she murmured, reading the panel. "Charge retention is clean." John smiled faintly. Didn't doubt it. Valasha turned to look at him. Her silver eyes were tired, but bright. She gave him a look only he knew, quiet affection wrapped in bone-deep trust. The kind of look that only grows from months of shared silence, sweat, and close. She stepped toward him. John moved forward to meet her, his arms already. When she reached him, he pulled her in gently, pressing his hands to the sides. She exhaled at the contact and rested her forehead. "You feel it," she whispered. John nodded. His palms were steady, warm. Beneath the thick skin of her abdomen, something shifted, a slow roll. A push from inside. Not sharp, not sudden, just real. A small life, growing quietly. He held his breath. "I still can't believe it," Valasha murmured. "Believe it," John said, his voice low. "You made space. The world just had to catch up." She leaned into him, large arms wrapping carefully around his shoulders, her body enveloping his with heat and weight and unspoken emotion. There had been no ceremony, no announcement, but they were a family now. Not because someone told them they were, but because they chose to be. Over and over, every day, Valasha pulled back just enough, not hungrily, not urgently, just a kiss full of stillness and gravity, one that said, "You found me," and I stayed. Later, John helped her settle into the low-backed recliner they'd built from repurposed walk. It had extra padding and a curved design that fit her belly perfectly. He brought over the soft-shelled container she liked to rest her feet on. Her toes curled slightly in relief as he knelt beside her, one arm resting on the side of her thigh. "Do you think it'll be a girl?" she asked softly. John smirked. "If she's anything like you, I'll have to reinforce the gates again." Valasha chuckled, a deep, full sound that vibrated in her chest. "I just want her to know she was wanted," she said. "Not sorted, not judged, just loved." "She'll know," John replied. "The moment she sees you, she'll know." They sat there in silence for a long time. Outside, the sky began to darken. The twin suns dipped behind the wreck. The wind picked up again, but it wasn't harsh, just cool. The kind of wind that carried distance but not. Inside, in the quiet hum of the compound they had built together, John and Valasha. Her massive form curled in the chair, his hand resting on the curve of her belly, her fingers loosely wrapped. No alarms, no fear, no pretending, just warmth, just life. The life they made, the future they chose, together. The morning began with the wind still. No sirens, no alarms, no signals from the ridge, only the sound of birds, small native carrion pickers chirping from the skeletal branches outside. It was early. Pale gray light filtered through the cloth-draped window above. John sat by the makeshift cooking plate, heating grain and root cubes. He stirred it quietly, listening for any sign. She hadn't slept much. Valasha had woken 4 times, each time slower, more strained, her face tense, sweat shining across. At first she said it was nothing. By the 4th time, she stopped pretending. John had cleared the room out. Soft towels, warm water, sterile tools, extra blankets. He'd checked the emergency medical unit twice. It wasn't sophisticated, but it would be enough. Now the time had come. A sound, low and strained, came from the other room. John stood. He crossed to the threshold, stopping just long enough. Then he entered. Valasha was seated on the floor mat, back propped against a stack of padding. Her large frame filled the room. Her legs were spread, knees drawn up, her hands gripping the sheet. Her violet skin was flushed, her lips parted as she breathed in sharp, shallow. The swell of her belly had changed, tightened, rounded lower. Her eyes locked on him. "It's time," she whispered. John knelt beside her without hesitation. "I'm here." She nodded once, face tight with focus. "It hurts, but not like I thought. It feels like something pulling out of me, like I'm being unwrapped." John reached for a cloth, pressed it gently to her forehead. "You're doing it right. Just follow your body." Valasha let out a long, shuddering, then another. Her thighs tensed. A ripple ran down her belly as another contraction. Her fingers clawed into the sheet. He saw it just barely. Movement. Below her stomach, nestled between her thighs, something shifted. The crown of life pushing. Her voice cracked, not in fear, but effort. Tremendous effort. She grunted low in her throat, eyes shut tight, body arched. "I can't," she gasped. "I'm too." John's hand gripped hers. "No, you're enough. "You're perfect. Just breathe with me." She nodded again, forehead pressed. Another contraction surged through her. She groaned, long, low, powerful. Her massive body quaked. The room filled with heat and scent and the sound of raw. Then at last, a cry. Not hers. A new voice, sharp and high and alive. John moved quickly. The baby was slick, pale violet, limbs curling, lungs opening with a full fury. She was perfect. He wrapped her in cloth, gently cleared her nose. Her tiny hands flailed. She was loud, strong. John turned to Valasha, who was now panting, tears leaking from her eyes. Not from pain, but from something. He placed the newborn girl into her. Valasha stared down, trembling. The baby squirmed against her chest. Valasha choked. Real. John crouched beside her, arms around her shoulders, watching them both. "You did it," he whispered. Valasha kissed the top of the baby's head, her lips pressed gently to the soft crown. "No," she said quietly. "We did." Hours passed. The wind stayed calm. The fireplace crackled low. Outside, the ridge was silent. Inside, Valasha lay curled on the padded cot, the baby sleeping against her bare chest, tiny breaths rising and falling. Her hair was a mess. Her body was sore, stretched, sweat damp, but her face had never looked so. John sat beside her, one hand resting on her side. He couldn't stop looking at the baby. "Have you thought of a name?" he asked. Valasha smiled without opening. "Saren," she said. "It means chosen light in my mother's dialect." John smiled. "It fits." She turned her head to look at him. "She'll grow up knowing she wasn't born out of or survival or accident. She'll grow up knowing she was wanted," John said. They didn't speak again for a while. They didn't need to. Outside, the twin suns began to rise. Inside, a new life had begun. The girl they said would never exist had arrived. And her mother, once sold, discarded, unloved, was now a creator of